Blog Talk Radio. Carol the Coach. Sex, love, and relationships. We talk about it here.
Carol the Coach. Compassion with contemporary relevance.
I am a psychotherapist. I can be your personal life coach, and I can help you with your issues. There are no problems too small or too big. You can talk about anything.
Speaker, columnist, radio TV host, and commentator. Carol the Coach brings messages of wellness and empowerment within reach of everyday people every day.
Almost 5 years ago, I lost my soulmate in an accident. He was killed in a plane crash. Life just, for me, has seemed to stop.
There are groups all over the city. I teach one. It is a specific way to start thinking so that you shift how you see the world, which then shifts your energy, and then you feel better and you actually see things differently.
Carol the Coach. Always available, too, at carolthecoach.com.
Now, I've got Russell on the line.
I'm 47 years old. I'm a truck driver. I'm married. I have a wife in San Francisco.
Okay.
I haven't been home in 6 months. My thing is, I don't know if I have a sex addiction or what the problem is. Why do I want what I can't have? And as soon as I can have it, I don't want it anymore.
You're right on target when you say, I don't know if I have a sexual addiction. Well, guess what? Yes, you do. And you know what? That's my specialty, Russell, so you're at the right place. Continue.
I meet women online, and I'm in a different part of the country. I travel all 48 states, so I love sex.
I hear self-esteem issues. You never felt good enough, and you didn't feel like you were getting what you should have then, and you're reenacting that now. Do you want to change that about yourself? I got an interesting email
from a man who really said he wanted to figure out what it would take to make his sexual addiction go away. And I said to him, you know, it's not just one thing, it's a variety of things. And I'm Carol Juergensen Sheets, a.k.a. Carol the Coach, and I'm here to help anybody who believes they have a sexual addiction and they want to improve their life. And I would love to tell you that it is just one thing, but it is not. As a matter of fact, it requires that you engage in a variety of things: self-discovery, working with a certified sexual addictions therapist, getting to 12-step meetings in SAA or SA, which are the acronyms for Sex Addicts Anonymous or Sex Anonymous, having a great sponsor, doing the right readings. It's not just one thing. It requires that you reprogram the brain and restructure yourself. You have to typically heal the wounds that you experienced in childhood, and that is why I'm so excited to be talking tonight to Dr. Claudia Black. Claudia Black has been doing research on addiction since the early 1970s, and she has worked with kids, families, and adults to help them to work through their multi-addictions, their anger, their depression. And she has made it her mission to help people who have experienced addiction and then treat the families that they're a part of, whether it's family of origin or families that they have with children. Claudia Black has written numerous books that have to do with addiction. My favorite kids' book that I always refer to is a book called My Dad Loves Me, but My Dad Has a Disease. And truly, we look at that book together. It's a book that she wrote, but she also used young patients who were able to identify what it felt like to have an addict in their family. And so I'm so excited to be talking with her tonight because she, as always, has expanded her field, and she has a book that she just wrote called The Intimate Treason, Healing the Trauma for Partners Confronting Sex Addiction. She really cares about the addict, but she knows how much trauma that family members feel when addiction is prevalent in their life. So I am so excited to be talking with her. Now, Dr. Black is a Meadows Senior Fellow. She has her MSW and PhD, and she now is working with the Meadows, helping the patients and the clients there to understand the traumas in their life. She looks at the big T and the little t traumas, focusing specifically on the impact they have on children or adults with childhood issues, and how that then presents itself in adult life. Now, she recognizes that people often become addicted to not just substances, but to behavioral processes. And if you've been listening to the show, you know that sex addiction is a behavioral process addiction. Some people believe that is way, way tougher to actually combat than drugs or alcohol. And, she's teamed up with the Meadows, who's the industry leader in treating trauma and addiction through its inpatient and workshop programs. And I must admit, I've been accused of singing the Meadows' praises. They're like, what, do you work for the Meadows, Carol? But to be real honest, the Meadows is one of those facilities that is top-notch, that have the best people in the field, and they have the best programming. Okay, there are other treatment centers that have great programming too, but I really believe the Meadows has designated the best treatment processes for sexual addiction. And you know me, I work with sexual addiction. I believe in it. That's why I'm here to help. And so, absolutely, when I am thinking about what intensive workshops can one go to get the most bang for their buck, or when might they need treatment at a facility that's going to handle their drug, alcohol, or sex addiction, the Meadows is at the top of my list. So I am so excited to be talking with her, not only about alcoholism and drug addiction, but about sexual addiction and how they affect the children in a family and you as you've grown up from that drug, alcohol, and sex addiction that was in your own family of origin. Very excited to be talking with her tonight. So you know me, and you know that I work specifically with addicts and want them to get the help that they need. And I know that it can be very, very difficult to get on the air and to talk about your sexual addiction. There is so much shame centered around sexual addiction. So I encourage you, if you have a question for Dr. Black or myself tonight, you may give us a call at 646-595-3284. I always say, put it in your cell phone so that when you listen to the show on Monday nights, you can ask the question directly to the expert. Again, that number is 646-595-3284. I also encourage you to send me emails at carolthecoach@AOL.com. And, I will definitely answer them to the very best of my ability and to help you work through the issues or find you the resources that I think are available. It was so interesting. I interviewed Dr. Ken Adams about 3 weeks ago and then got an email from somebody who said, hey, Carol, I download the show on iTunes, and I love listening to the podcast when I'm working out or doing my chores or traveling, taking long trips in the car. And I sure wish you'd have Dr. Ken Adams on because I heard him about a year ago, and I thought his topic of enmeshed sons and mothers was fabulous. So I quickly emailed them back, and I said, okay, you have got to make sure you pay attention to our last show, because that's when I introduced Dr. Adams again for a second time, and he talked about the intensives that he is having for men who have overly enmeshed relationships with their mother. Oftentimes the partner spots that before anybody else does. It seems so normal to the client that they don't necessarily see it. They know something's wrong, but they don't know what. But that's when I always say I love working with people and their significant others, because I don't like treating people in a vacuum. I like to hear what someone believes is going on in their own family, and partners typically have a great perspective that my clients don't particularly have. Now, I got this email from someone who said, I've heard, Carol, that people in recovery say, I'm grateful for my addiction. I think I can say that for myself, but am hesitant because I'm not completely sure I believe it. Boy, I get that. 1 minute when you're in the darkest moments of your life, you'll say, there is not one thing I am grateful for that has to do with this addiction. And then the next moment, you'll say, you know what? This addiction has taught me so much. It's helped me look into my own life. It is an amazing experience to have realized that there are things that I need to heal and ways that I need to grow. I am grateful for my addiction. And I've talked about it before. They interviewed 20,000 people, and all 20,000 were able to identify 3 common features that create happiness. If you need to be happier in your life, then you need to be thinking about these 3 features. 1, people that are happy stay in the moment. They don't perseverate about their past, and they don't worry about their future. 2, people that are happy are people that focus on the gratitude in their life. They focus on what's working, and they typically have some sort of experience whereby they say, okay, I'm going to be grateful. I'm going to be grateful every day of my life. A lot of people do it as a morning ritual. They say, I'm not going to go to work or exercise or anything else until I write down 10 of my gratitudes. And, it's kind of interesting because clearly I was talking with a friend today, and she said, I want to buy that book, A Complaint-Free World. And I said, hey, let's do that together. Let's get a complaint-free world that really is based on the premise that you go 21 days without complaining, and you wear a purple band on your right arm. And when you complain, you have to flip it to your left arm, and then you start over with your 21 days. And you really work towards getting past the 21 days of complaining. And when you do that, you shift how you think and feel, which shifts how you experience the world. So having gratitude is that second component to really living a happy life. The third component is reframing. And when you reframe in your world, then you look at life's obstacles and problems and you say, hey, you know what? I'm going to ask myself, how did I grow stronger, and what has this problem, this situation, this obstacle taught me? And when you do that, you take yourself out of the victim role and you put yourself in an empowered state. And recovery is all about empowerment. And so I'm here to talk with you very clearly about what is it you can do to stay in that state of gratitude, to feel empowered, and to live in the moment, which are 3 very important aspects of life. And tonight I am so excited to be interviewing Dr. Claudia Black. So, Dr. Claudia Black, welcome to the Sex Help with Carol the Coach show. How are you tonight?
Hello. I didn't know you knew I was on. I'm doing really good, and I'm pleased to be on your show and to hear your last few comments.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And obviously you're a hero of mine. I mean, you have made it your life's mission to work with addicts and their families, especially kids, and to help them through the traumas, little T and big T traumas that they've experienced when any kind of addiction has been prevalent in their life. So I've got some questions for you while you're here. I wanted to know, you actually are a senior fellow at the Meadows, and I was singing their praises earlier. Can you tell me what that means to be a senior fellow?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm delighted and I'm honored to be a senior fellow at the Meadows. And it means different things for different ones of us, but for me, I've actually been doing hands-on work at the Meadows since 1998. And I was referred to as a senior fellow at that time. I was really consulting, but in the last few years, they've developed this cadre of just a very handful of us who are pioneers in our particular area of behavioral health care, trauma specialists, addiction specialists, myself, Bessel Vanderkolk, Peter Levine, John Bradshaw, Patrick Carnes today are just a handful. I think there's probably about 7 of us. So for me, it means I have the opportunity to go in and actually help them take a look at their programs, to continue to make their programs state-of-the-art and premier. The Meadows has been in existence for 35 years now, and we always want to be on the cutting edge. It also gives me the opportunity to go in and sit with patients, sit with clients. I do a lot of group work with clients, and so I do program development, staff training, and as I said, I get to do my hands-on as well. So, it's one of, for me, so much of my work, all of my work really, in the time I've been in the field, has to do with how families are affected by addiction. And I recognized very early on that as I was working with very young family members, many times, ultimately, they often would become the wife, the husband, the partner of an addict, and in many cases, ultimately, they would become the addict. And this is one of the few programs in the country where we have the opportunity to intervene and to stop the generational repetition. And so it fits philosophically with the work that I began in the late 1970s. So it's just a thrill for me to be a senior fellow and to be a part of their leadership team.
Boy, I can really appreciate that. And I have to tell you that I had one of my clients go back to the Meadows last weekend for the alumni celebration.
Oh.
And she got to hear you there, and obviously she came back with a renewed invigoration about gratitude in general. I mean, recovery is so difficult and can be so hard, but it is so rewarding, and it provides such gratitude at where you were versus where you are versus where you're going. And so this is a woman who just sang everybody's praises. She walked up to Dr. Carnes and she said, I've had 2 Meadows stays, and I can honestly tell you, this is the first time I've been in recovery. I am really trying, Dr. Carnes. And he looked at her and he said, I don't like that trying word. You're either doing it or you're not. And she goes, I love that. It was so definitive that I need to make my recovery an everyday process. So tell me a little bit about what aspects of your work stand out to you since you've been in the field of addiction for so many years.
What aspects of my work stand out to me?
Yeah.
I think that, wow, that's a lot, because I've been in the field for a very, very long period of time, a lot older than probably even some of your listeners. But I think that it's the look on the kid's face at the conclusion of a family week, the anticipation that things may be able to be different. I think that it's the moment when it's often the 8 or 9-year-old child who can speak the truth for the family when the other family members have been in denial for such long periods of time. Sort of the wisdom that comes from their words. I always say that, denial permeates addictive family systems and doesn't just impact the addicted person, but that's also true for the spouses and partners. But young children, often by the time they're 9 and 10 years of age, are already learning how to minimize and discount. So it's often that even younger child, that 8 and 9-year-old child, who is able to sort of speak that family's truth, and just how pivotal that and transformational that can be for that whole family system as that truth starts to be spoken, wherever that truth comes from, but so oftentimes it's the kids.
Well, absolutely, and the number one children's book that I recommend to a family that has addiction in their background, whether it be alcohol or drugs, is My Father Loves Me, My Father Has a Disease. Mm-hmm. When you talk about things so simplistically like, being addicted is like a refrigerator that's stuck, a magnet that's stuck to a refrigerator, or how the bees are stuck to the pollen and the flowers. Kids get that. They know that their mom or their father, they're doing something that they can't seem to stop, and yet they have that core issue of, there must be something I could do that would make a difference, that could get them to unstick, or that would make them feel happier. Kids take such a responsibility for their parents' issues, and you have worked with this all your life.
And kids at a very young age begin to internalize it. At the Meadows, we do a lot of shame reduction work with people of all ages that come in there because, as I said, from such a young age, so many of the adult patients were raised in addictive homes, and if not in an addictive home, they were raised in an otherwise fairly dysfunctional and impaired family system, and they've internalized that shame-based belief that who I am isn't good enough, that who I am is not okay, that I am not of value. And as a consequence to that, and the language we use on this treatment program is they learn to garner other esteem, and they're always seeking to feel good about themselves by searching for something outside of themselves and never having really come to internalize their own worth and value. And people can do prevention work if you're working with a young child, but oftentimes we're doing intervention work as we work with the teenagers in our families and the adults, again, whether they're the partners or the addicted. But I also want to say, at the Meadows, we don't just work with addicted clients. We work with a lot of people who've had various forms of trauma in their life that didn't become addicted. The majority of people who have trauma do not necessarily become addicted, but the majority of people who are addicted are most apt to have had traumatic experiences in their life. And we also certainly work a lot with depression and anxiety disorders, but again, that is so often trauma-based. And I see a lot of adult clients with anxieties and depression disorders that came from addictive homes, or they came from otherwise pretty severely impaired family systems. And that usually, the bottom line is usually chronic loss, and what creates that loss are usually traumatic experiences.
Well, I know, and you delineate between little t and big T trauma. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about the difference between little t and big T trauma?
Well, so oftentimes when people think of trauma, they think of a traumatic situation, such as a shooting, a car accident, one's house burning down, a rape, an otherwise violent crime. And those are certainly very horrific and can be very traumatic situations for people. And those typically are thought of as more big T, that which is more blatant and typically more singular, is an event, where a little t trauma is something that is more chronic and perceived to be more subtle, not quite as overt, not quite as blatant. And with your little t traumas, a little t trauma, an example of that would be chronic bullying. A little t trauma is chronic neglect, various forms of emotional abandonment over time. Now, in an addictive family system, you do have big T traumas right within the family. Any forms of physical and sexual abuse would be a big T trauma, even though they are chronic, compared to, in the addicted family, living with various forms of emotional abandonment over time, which again is considered more of a small T. Now, nothing is to be negated here. What we do want people to know is sometimes they did not experience what are called big T traumas in their life. They didn't have that horrific car accident. They didn't watch their house burn down. They didn't witness a violent shooting in their neighborhood. They didn't have physical or sexual abuse, but they may have had a lot of chronic less than nurturing trauma in their life. And a lot of small T trauma can add up to something as significant as a big T trauma. And that's just sort of a metaphor, a way for clients to begin to name that which was hurtful to them. And so oftentimes in the addictions field, when we're working with trauma, you're working with developmental trauma. And what I want to remind people is we work with people who come from very difficult family histories the majority of the time. And at 5, 9, 10, 12, 15 years of age, they've been living with chronic fear. And they don't have a way. At times of fear, most people are going to want to stand and fight, or they're going to want to remove themselves from the situation. Well, when that which is traumatic exists within the family, you can't run away, and you usually can't stand and fight, and so they often move into what we refer to as a freeze response, and that is the consequence of even living with small, chronic forms of abandonment. I don't have the way in which to remove myself from that which is very hurtful and painful, even when it isn't blatant.
Well, that makes total sense, and that freeze not only freezes them for the moment, but it freezes them developmentally. And so oftentimes they psychologically and developmentally have difficulty growing and trusting in the world to be able to grow. And I know that do not talk, trust, and feel comes from those kind of little T traumas.
That's right. That's right. You know, people learn how not to talk honestly about what it is that's going on. For a variety of reasons, they learn how not to talk honestly because they don't think anything good will come from it, because maybe they've tried once and nothing good came from it. Or, in fact, they tried and things got worse for a little bit of time. They also learn how not to talk because they think that they are being disloyal to the people that they love and care about. And I deal with that issue of loyalty, whether or not somebody is a 9-year-old or a 75-year-old when it comes to trauma and addiction in the context of families. But for many of them, they've never had the voice. And that's part of what the alumni event was about. It was great that you actually had a client that had come to it. It was about claiming your voice, and it was about naming your own reality. And that's a significant part of recovery, is being able to speak your truth, what your experience has been. And for many people, that's been something that got minimized and didn't occur for them for most of their life.
Well, and you had talked about shame reduction, and I know that so oftentimes, whether it's a little T or a big T trauma, clients are likely to perpetuate that cycle by reenacting that trauma as teenagers and young adults, and then into middle age and late adulthood until they get intervention or help. And so what I have been so impressed about with the Meadows is that they work with that trauma reenactment and take that shame reduction. They take the shame out of it. You know, they help people to understand you did this as a coping mechanism, and then eventually it didn't work for you any longer. Now you need to create new behaviors in your life. So if you were going to...
Exactly the words that I used, by the way, when I spoke to the clients last week, that, you know, I say as I talk about this, please don't put judgment on yourself, and please don't be critical, because we do the only thing we know how to do that gives us a sense of survivorship. It's just that in the long run, it comes to bite us in the rear end. In the long run, it becomes very self-defeating, very self-destructive, and not only hurts us, but it hurts all the other people that we care about in our lives today. But I'm sorry.
Well, and I was going to ask you, you know, you talked about shame reduction, and that's a new terminology for a lot of my listeners. They're just now learning about what is shame reduction. If you had to describe that, how would you define shame reduction?
Well, first let me say, shame is the painful feeling that comes with the belief there's something inherently wrong with who we are. So I'm going to say that again. It's the painful feeling that comes with the belief there's something inherently wrong with who we are. But the more we come to believe that, take on that belief system that who I am is not okay, actually the more emotionally disconnected I am from myself. So a part of shame reduction, and then we act out. We develop what I call shame screens, behaviors and defenses to protect ourselves from the awareness of that shame. Some of us act out, and one of our screens can be rageful behavior. It can be controlling behavior. Our perfectionism could be a manifestation of trying to pretend that we're not feeling the depth of shame that we are. Other ways that we defend against the shame could be procrastination. Why bother to even try? Because I can't do it well enough anyway, and I don't want to get to that feeling state again. So we have lots of different ways we try and screen ourselves from knowing that shame. So a part of shame reduction is recognizing when you're engaged in a shame screen and catching yourself in that. We make shame-based statements to ourselves all the time. I'm so stupid I can't get anything right. If they really knew, they wouldn't like me. Those are shame-based statements. So we teach people how to catch themselves in the state of, in essence, shaming themselves. I always say that we do to ourselves that which was once done to us. So if I internalized a lot of messages, either from aspects of culture or family, that were shaming for me, chances are today I do those same kinds of things to myself. I'm the one who tells myself that I'm stupid. I'm the one who tells myself that I'm not worthy of anything. So shame reduction is catching yourself, shaming yourself in essence, using a stop technique and then some kind of re-corrective experience and reminding yourself that that's a message that came from the outside. That is something
right.
that we
I mean, when you do that long enough and you do that with consistency, repetitively, it really makes a difference then in how you think. I have a couple of callers. I was wondering if you'd be willing to take a caller right now.
Certainly, I'd love that.
Oh, excellent. So I have a caller on the
Hello?
line. Hello there. Can you share with me your question for Dr. Black?
Yeah. I'm 14 and I want to know what's the best alcohol brand to start drinking?
You are 14 years old. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
And you're asking me what the best brand of alcohol is for you. They're obviously not screening these telephone calls.
No, they aren't, and this one probably changed.
You know, I'm assuming that this is a joke, but obviously, this isn't what you want to be asking of me, and this isn't what I hope that you're really thinking about doing. I'd really
and you know what? That tells me, because that person is listening to the show. I'm not sure he's 14 or not, and we'll have to have our screener do a better job of that. But clearly, that's somebody who probably has an alcohol problem, because he is making light of that situation and is fearful. He's making light of it probably because he's fearful of his own behaviors. And that is part of shaming, too. Clearly, when people make fun of themselves, it says they're not taking their life seriously. So I want to ask you, if I could, when you talk about addiction and you delineate between process addictions and then drug or alcohol abuse, I've been trained to believe that process addictions sometimes are the toughest. Do you find that they're the toughest addiction to deal with?
People will say that, particularly around your sex addictions and your food addictions, because they are innate aspects to who we are. And that the goal is not to abstain from sex, nor is it to abstain from food in general. Now, you have other types of process addictions, such as gambling addictions. Well, we don't abstain from holding money in our hands, but we certainly are looking to abstain from certain kinds of behaviors about how we use that money. So when people say they're more difficult, the abstinence is the issue, and it's not as all or nothing from sort of the drug, but it's really about how we use that. And so from that standpoint, personally, I think recovery is difficult because recovery in and of itself isn't about abstinence. In general, it's a lot about emotional recovery and emotional literacy, and it's learning how to look at the ways in which we think and how we tolerate our feelings, let alone the behavioral skills of learning how not to use food in a certain way, how to not use money in a certain way, how to reframe who we are in terms of our sexuality. So I don't want to make light of any addiction, because I think that they're all, they can be very, very difficult. And a part of the reason they're difficult is because we attempt to handle them by ourselves. And I want to go back to something at the first of the show. You talked about the woman who sought out an alumni group. How important community is in recovery. And, I think there's two big resistances. There's a lot of resistances to recovery. But the one is maybe there's a part of us that would like to live our lives differently, but we're so rigidly self-reliant and so non-trusting of others and are so full of shame that we attempt to do it by ourselves when, in fact, we refer to addiction as a disease of disconnection and isolation. And recovery is about connecting with ourselves, but it's also about connecting with others. And then I think the other...
When you say disconnection and isolation, you're referencing disconnecting from one's feelings, from one's values and beliefs, as well as isolating and not connecting to others, not trusting, and not forming relationships. Is that correct?
Right. Yes, we're talking about emotional isolation and social isolation. So the other point I was going to make is how painful. We don't want the pain. And it's painful because if we're acting out in our addictions, we've usually acted outside of our value system. And we feel pain about that. We feel guilt about that. We feel shame about that. And recovery means coming face to face with what some of our own behaviors have been that have been hurtful to us and hurtful to other people. So recovery isn't easy, but what we want people to know is it's absolutely doable, it's transformational, and we can come to celebrate and experience joy in a way that we've never, ever experienced it before.
Well, that's an excellent point. And, I don't know if you heard the beginning of the show, but I talked about the fact that, recovery has all sorts of supports, from bibliotherapy. Your books have been famous in terms of helping people to feel normal, and you validate children's experiences and partners' experiences as well as the addict, and 12-step groups and treatment centers and intensives, and sometimes a person has to engage in all of those resources to really get the help they need. Now, in your opinion, what do you think about the 12-step community? Do you think that's a helpful resource for people who may say, I'll go to a counselor, but I don't want to go to a group?
Yeah. I'm a very strong proponent of the 12-step communities. I think that more people have gotten and been able to get the ongoing support that's allowed them ongoing recovery within the 12-step communities than any other one identifiable resource. What I also know is that given so many people's trauma histories, that very oftentimes people do need exactly what you said. They need even more, even something that is additional, and that's where various forms of treatment, short-term and long-term, will be very, very helpful. I think that, one of the things I see so much resistance with is I see as the addicted person begins their recovery and they start to make their commitments to various forms of treatment and 12-step communities, family members have a harder time. That they, with a little bit of understanding, a little bit of an education, they think that if they're just supportive, that somehow everything's just going to turn itself around. And one of the things that we realize is that the person who follows through with ongoing recovery practice will leave emotionally, the other people get left behind if they don't engage in their own recovery as well. And family members typically have as much emotionally for which they need to recover as the addicted person does. And so I strongly encourage families to be open to your Al-Anon meetings, your Nar-Anon meetings. Those are support meetings for family and friends when somebody's addicted to other drugs, not just alcohol. In the 12-step world, sex addiction and gambling, again, we have Gam-Anon, very special meetings for family and friends as well, for both your sex addictions and your gambling addictions. So, again, I'm just a very strong proponent. People have been staying clean and sober from their various drugs, and family members have been getting well for over 60 years in our 12-step programs. And, again, I certainly there's resistance. And because, again, we want to do it all by ourselves. And
well, yeah, and you brought up the important point that the Meadows, as well as yourself, have worked diligently to break the generational patterns. And I know that adult children of alcoholic meetings are excellent if you were a child that grew up with an alcoholic parent. Now, what if you're a recovering parent? What can a recovering parent do to make up for the impact that their behavior has had on their kids?
If you're a recovering parent, well, probably first and foremost, maintain your recovery practice, not just your recovery, but your recovery practices. But when it comes to parenting your kids, I always say you need to be their best parent and not their best friend. And my experience is that as recovering parents, one has a lot of guilt, and because of that guilt, we have difficulty, if we're still raising our kids, setting limits and providing the structure that they need. We get too permissive, and don't let that guilt get in the way. You would have been a better parent, probably, had you not been caught up in your own codependency or your own addictive disorders. But today you're in recovery, and again, they'll work that guilt. I mean, particularly as they're in their adolescent age years, they will do what they can to manipulate, because that's what a part of being an adolescent is typically about, or part of what it's about. So don't let your guilt rule your parenting skills. On another practical level, one of the things that we know about kids and resiliency is the more you have healthy rituals in the context of the family, typically the greater the strengths that child will show. And even when the family was involved in a lot of chaos and drama, there may have been some healthy rituals in the family, so don't assume that there weren't. So go back and take a look at, is this a family that eats together? Do we eat dinner together? How frequently? Do we eat breakfast together? How frequently? The more you eat at a dinner table together, be it breakfast, lunch, or dinner, that's, research is showing that makes a significant difference in the lives of these kids as they go into their adulthood. Take a look at rituals. Is there anything in particular that you do on a weekend that the family can count on? A ritual, you're looking for a healthy ritual, something that we do in the family that says we have pride in our family, that this family enjoys each other, this family supports each other. So don't think of rituals as just what we do at holiday time or what we do on a birthday. But in the context of a day, is there one thing in which we come together as a family, and in essence the behavior is saying we value each other and our time with each other. So, again, be their best parent, not their friend, as I said. Don't let guilt get in your way. These kids need consistency. They need structure in their lives, and you need to engage with your kids. They need your time. And obviously you have a lot of commitments with hopefully 12-step programs and possibly aftercare. But you're not going to make up for all the lost time in a real short period of time. But your kids usually are going to be very gracious. I have a wonderful book called Straight Talk. It's about what recovering parents can say to their kids about their addiction, to also help you explain your addiction, or to help explain why it is you're going to the 12-step meetings that you're going to, et cetera. And I always want to say there's two things that, as recovering parents, you never want to underestimate. Just behaviorally, if you stay in recovery, your behavior models that people can change. Your behavior models that, and trust me, they're listening to your behavior a lot more than they're listening to your words. The other thing is that your recovery models is that it's okay to ask for help. Those are two important messages that your kids will be witnessing, whether or not they appear to be listening to you. People can change, and it's okay to ask for help. And I say that because sometimes by the time you're in recovery, your kids are 15, 16 years of age, and they're separating. And that's developmentally what kids do at that age. They're pulling apart, and their world of peers and friends becomes more important than their relationship with mom or dad, just because you've gotten clean and sober, or that you're not acting crazy anymore in your codependency. And also sometimes the kids are of adult age and they're out of the home, so you don't have as much influence. And when that's true, again, you model that people can change and that it's okay to ask for help. And then you find ways to be a part of their life that they're allowing you to be. And oftentimes it's going to be incremental for a period of time. They may not trust right away.
Absolutely.
And they have reasons not to trust right away.
I love the book Straight Talk because it really does identify the issues that parents want to know about how they can do their life differently, how they can talk with their kids. I just wanted to emphasize that people that want to learn more about you, it's hard for me to believe that they wouldn't know who you are, but if people want to learn more about you, they can go to www.claudiablack.com, and they can email you at info@claudiablack.com. And then the Meadows also has a website, and they have lots and lots of information at www.themeadows.com. And those are two excellent resources for people that want help. And here's what I believe about this show. You know, we are the only show about sexual addiction on the Internet. And when you go to iTunes and just put in sexual addiction, this show comes up. And the majority of people that listen to the show really do have a burning issue with sexual addiction, or they love somebody who has a sexual addiction, and we have even some children that listen to the show. So I have to be very mindful of the fact that, you know, I have no idea what age group is going to be listening. The majority of them are older, but some of them are young. And I know that you know that when kids deal with addiction, they typically have to grow up fast. They're very resilient. They're very resourceful. And they're able to access information that I, as an adult, would not even think about, i.e. iTunes, and putting in the words alcoholism, drug addiction, sexual addiction. So if I've got a listener right now who has a family member that they believe has an addiction, do you believe that they can get that person help? And that second question, which I had an email earlier, was, can somebody get sober on their own, or do they always need the help of someone else?
Certainly, I think there's probably not a listener out there that knows somebody who stopped their drinking, using, or their sexual acting out without help. I mean, that may happen, but I think that other people who are more involved in other recovery practices recognize that they stopped the specific behavior, but that doesn't necessarily give them, they don't necessarily become more honest in every aspect of their life. They don't necessarily become more accountable in every aspect of their life. They don't necessarily become happier people. I mean, that's what recovery practice has the potential of doing, helping you to become a more honest person, a more accountable person, a happier person, to give you different kinds of skills and how you relate to other people. It isn't about just stopping a particular behavior that was self-destructive. But, yeah, we all know people who have an ability in which to stop. But my hope is that you'd be willing to allow other people to be a part of that process, because I think recovery goes beyond stopping that.
Absolutely. So recovery is really about setting up those supports so that you're not doing it all by yourself.
Yeah. You know, it's such a lonely, and oftentimes such a fear-based kind of way. And I always say there's been far too much fear in all of our lives, and that we need something that is not so fear-based. We need something that really isn't as lonely as that. And again, not everybody's an extrovert, and I understand that. But the likelihood of sustaining recovery and being able to thrive in your recovery is typically much greater when you go through a treatment and recovery process.
Well, 100%, I would agree with you. And, you know, truly, I have said for a long time that with addiction comes a large degree of shame. And yet what I know to be true is that children and partners of the addict, whether it be drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, they are traumatized more often and actually suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, how would you describe to our listeners what post-traumatic stress disorder is?
Well, first I want to say that when there's sex addiction within the family, the likelihood of that is even greater. There's a far greater sense of betrayal. There's a far greater sense of trauma when you have your compulsive sexual betrayals. And so I really want to validate that for that particular listener. And I think the way I see it particularly in that partner is the exaggerated startle response, the emotional reactivity, how you can go from feeling nothing to absolute rage in nanoseconds, from 0 to 10 within a second or two. These are people who have sleep disturbances. These are people who are in a constant state of preoccupation and sometimes as they're attempting to do one thing, they're having intrusive thoughts and actual flashbacks of scenes or visualizations of what they have imagined. I mean, that is a rough way in which to be. But again, I think that some of that is certainly possible with any kind of an addiction, but I see that even more so with the partners and the spouses for their sex addiction.
Well, and your latest
I don't know.
book. Oh, go ahead.
Pardon?
I was going to say your latest book, Intimate Treason, Healing the Trauma for Partners Confronting Sex Addiction. I mean, it's pioneer work in the field. It's amazing. And what made you write that book?
Well, I had written a book called Deceived, Facing Sexual Betrayal, Lies, and Secrets about 5 years ago, and it very specifically was for partners. And at that time, the only books written for partners really talked about sex addiction, didn't talk about what recovery could look like. And my experience working with partners was that they really needed to have a sense of what their recovery is about. And so the first book was really sort of the primer about what it means to be a partner, what it is you're going to focus on in your recovery, and it's a lot of that stabilization. But by the time that was done, I was very aware that there was a second book that needed to be written, and that was to focus more on the trauma that's related to being the partner of, and to actually give people more hands-on skill. So the second book, Intimate Treason, is what I call content-driven. Means you're going to get a lot of additional new information, but you're also going to get a lot of tools to walk you through the process of attending to those PTSD issues, attending to those flashbacks, attending to the intrusive thoughts, attending to the emotional reactivity, attending to the hypervigilance. So I wrote it with another author, Carol Tripodi, out of the Philadelphia area, who specializes and works on a daily basis with this population. And as I said, the purpose of this was to give people more of a hands-on tool kit for how to cope and how to begin their own recovery process, and some skills in maintaining that recovery process. But it has a far greater trauma overview to it than the first book has. But I usually tell people start with Deceived and then go to Intimate Treason. If you haven't read anything else, you want to start with Deceived and then go to Intimate Treason, because you do need a framework and some validation for your own recovery.
Well, got it. That's a good recommendation. And I tell you, it feels very frustrating for my clients who are partners, because oftentimes when their husband or wife gets into recovery from sexual addiction and they're working a strong program and they're actually doing very, very well, the partner still feels that emotion regulation issue, and they do feel the PTSD, and they do have the sleep interruption, and they're like, why is he or she getting better and I feel as bad, if not worse? And so they feel double guilt. They feel guilt that they're not celebrating more of the recovery because they're so hypervigilant that things don't crumble right before them. And so it's
the relationship has a third partner. There is the person who did the acting out, then there is the partner, and now there is the PTSD. And that's what's so often going on, and you can't put a real time frame on that, but trust me, without any kind of treatment process, it will most likely go on for months, and sometimes you've seen it go on even longer. This is a case where typically the 12-step model is not going to be by itself enough, and this is where the partner, I highly encourage, if they're able to, that they work with a therapist in their community that specializes in this. I also know that I'm going to go ahead and do a plug here, that the Meadows offers a 5-day program for partners in a workshop format. And this isn't just a family week. When you go to a sex addiction treatment program, sometimes they'll have a 3-day family program or a 5-day family program, such as what we have. But this is in addition to what would be an inpatient family week. This is you don't even have to have a partner in recovery. You don't have to have a partner that's gone to that treatment program. That anybody can come, and they do from all over the country, to spend 5 days where we do a lot of trauma therapies in the context of some cognitive behavioral works, a lot of feeling work, but a lot of self-regulation, affect regulation, just being able to calm those feelings down so, again, you're not in a constant state of PTSD. And as I said, we do a 5-day partners program, and there are other people in the country who do as well. But don't...
Absolutely. Now, is that known as the Survivor Week?
No, it's not. Survivors Week is a family of origin 5-day program, and a lot of our partners really benefit from that. But this is very specifically, it's called an Intimate Treason, a 5-day workshop, healing from the trauma of sex addiction. And so it's,
so it follows your book
partners
as the model.
Yeah, and it does follow the book as the model, But Survivors is another good, Survivors has really been the hallmark of, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but the hallmark of the Meadows for 35 years, that everybody who goes through the Meadows experiences a 5-day family of origin workshop looking at early child trauma. And other people from the outside can come and attend those as well. But the Partners is really working with the trauma that's most apt to be related to what's gone on with the sex addiction in the family.
Excellent. Well, I am talking with Dr. Claudia Black, who works at the Meadows, and she is actually a senior fellow. And if you are interested in finding out about that intensive week, you can call the intake coordinator at 866-856-1279 or visit www.themeadows.com for more information. They have these weeks periodically throughout the year, and so if it's filled this time around, you can sign up for the next week that would help partners who are experiencing a lot of trauma based on their loved one's sexual addiction. So, again, you said if people want more information about this, they can contact your website, which is very informative. It's www.claudiablack.com, or they can email you at info@claudiablack.com. I imagine Sandy will be screening those calls, those emails, and then they can get your book. The latest one is Intimate Treason, Healing the Trauma for Partners Confronting Sex Addiction. And then you said the book that you actually wrote before that is called Deceived, Facing Sexual Betrayal, Lies, and Secrets. Got it. Again, all that's very accessible on Amazon, Deceived and Intimate Treason. Okay. And I do want to say to people, if they email me, we don't really screen my emails. I will get my emails. Actually, I have an assistant that gets them first. But, unless somebody said, was really abusive, I'm sure I'd see that email. I didn't want people to think that an outsider was really screening things. Okay. Although that Sandy is wonderful. She is your assistant, and she's amazing. She is my assistant of 15 years, and I love her dearly. She is amazing. Well, I was so impressed with her. She's just very organized and really was quite helpful in getting you booked for tonight's show. So, Dr. Claudia Black, I cannot thank you enough for being so available, helping our listeners out there. You and I both know that whenever we're talking sexual addiction, we're usually looking at least one, if not two other addictions. And when there's addictions prevalent, there has almost always been childhood issues with addiction. And so you've made it your mission to help kids and families and partners and the addict. And you are a hero in so many of the clinicians that I work with in our lives. So thank you so much for dedicating your life to this. Well, thank you for having me on the show. And, again, I love my work. I feel like it's just an honor to be witness to the miracles of recovery, and I love being witness to them. And, I decided, I did a little interview today with a high school girl, and she asked me about why I wanted to be in the field. And one of the things that I told her is that there was so much fear in my own growing up life, and that was because of the multi-addictions in my family. And I really knew that my dad didn't want to live the way he was living. I didn't know what was wrong with him, but I knew that this wasn't who I had remembered him being when I was 4 and 5 and 6 years of age. And I knew he didn't deserve to live with the fear. I knew my mom didn't deserve to live with the fear. And I knew that these 3 little kids, myself included in that house, didn't deserve to live with that fear. And it's just a blessing to be able to be a part of people's lives where they no longer live with that chronic fear that just so permeates any addictive household. And the possibilities of recovery are out there. They are truly there. There's lots of people out there willing to help. will you give hope, strength, and recovery to the field? And again, I thank you very much, and just have a blessed week.
Thank you. I will. To your listeners as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great one. Okay, well, you are listening to Sex Help with Carol the Coach, and I am so honored to have Dr. Black on the line. And we'll catch you next week when we're going to be interviewing Deborah Whalen and looking forward to her information about how sexual addiction affects her clients. As I say at the end of every show, there'll only be one of you at all times, so fearlessly have the courage to be yourself. Have a great